Chapter 1, Post Office by Charles Bukowski. It began as a mistake. It was the Christmas season, and I learned from the drunk up the hill who did the trick every Christmas that they would hire damn near anybody, and so I went. And the next thing I knew, I had this leather sack on my back and was hiking around at my leisure. What a job, I thought. Soft. They only gave you a block or two, and if you managed to finish, the regular carrier would give you another block to carry. Or maybe you'd go back in, and the soup would give you another. But you just took your time and shoved those Christmas cards in the slots. I think it was my second day as a Christmas temp that this big woman came out and walked around with me as I delivered letters. What I mean by big was that her ass was big and her tits were big and that she was big in all the right places. She seemed a bit crazy, but I kept looking at her body and I didn't care. She talked and talked and talked, then it came out. Her husband was an officer on an island far away, and she got lonely, and I lived in this little house and back all by herself. What little house, I asked. She wrote the address on a piece of paper. I'm lonely too, I said. I'll come by and we'll talk tonight. Hi, my name is William James Lindberg, and this is the Chapel of Poetry. And in the Chapel of Poetry, we, you and I, celebrate the word of our fellow human beings, that word that is given to us from the universe. And it falls down. It falls down as little syllables of sound that fly around like fireflies around our head, that illuminate us. It illuminate us, and we hear the syllables, and the syllables go into our ears and deep into the drums, and they beat out the lines of the magic that we write in the form of poetry. And in tonight's Chapel of Poetry, we will be celebrating the word of Larry Crist in his book, UNDERTOW Overtures. And if you may remember, in the very first episode of Chapel of Poetry, I read one of this book, the very first poem, called On the House. And tonight I will be doing a more extended reading. I'll be reading several poems from this book. And without further ado, I'm going to start here with the report card. Larry continues to make bad use of time. He has shown himself capable on occasion, but is generally too playful and distractible to accomplish much. He seems unsure of basic math facts and processes. He has trouble settling down. He lacks self-discipline and self-direction. He is working far below his potential. This can be attributed to the fact he feels it unnecessary to complete daily assignments. He is a poor citizen. Little has changed since third grade when it began to get dull. And the girls interesting. My teacher's assessments were all dead on. Only one thing I forgot to tell them all, to fuck off. Not sure if I did or not, but for those I may have forgot, this is for you. Fuck you. That wasn't on there. I just added that in. Looks like there's a truck going by. The Fantastic Four were family and behaved like family, albeit a comic book family. Ben Grimm, Reed Richards, Sue Richards, and Johnny Storm. Reed was married to Sue, who was sister to Johnny, the perennial fiery teenager who was always sparring with Ben. The thing science chum of Reed's. They had been struck by cosmic radioactivity, something or other, on a trip to the moon, which affected them all differently, giving them powers. I liked imagining how their powers affected their genitalia. Reed Richards could stretch his cock like an engorged anaconda and then make it disappear in Sue Richards' invisible snatch. Johnny could make his cock burst into flames or shoot fire. That would have been fun at the Clap Clinic. With his orange, bricky body, Ben's thing would have been a whole nother thing. His petite girlfriend, Alicia, who conveniently was blind, would have had no trouble finding her thing in the dark. There was always so much more to them than their monthly 20 pages allowed as they battled Doc Ock, Dr. Doom, the Submariner, and the Hulk, the Mole People, the Watcher, the Silver Surfer, all the many cosmological catastrophic cataclysms that might face any family, saving the world and universe again and again. Practically every issue just as weird or fucked up as any Tolstoyan family, but staying together, a family union, dysfunctional, yes, but working through it. That most incredible and fantastic far-fetched plot device of them all. What I like about Larry's work is, just like in reading Charles Bukowski's work, is the accessibility of it, and the lack of, or what is the opposite of obscure? Is the opacity, the clearness of it, the opacity of the work. And his work in this series was very much like Anastasia Tolbert and Jean Vayner's poetry. The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, the Rubaiyat, that was quite a bit more obscure, and but that poetry came from that generation of obscurity, or the generations prior to Walt Whitman, who wrote free verse, or the father of modern day poetry, as to where we are today. And so this next poem of Larry's on page 67 is called Sheep. Only a century ago, we lived half as long. You were lucky maybe to survive long enough to get cancer, have a heart attack, go mad. A splinter could kill you. Measles, polio, yellow fever, a wayward horse, a cold. People were tougher, but only because the weak did not last. These days, they run things stationed in cubicles, climate-controlled fluorescent domiciles, with arch and back and wrist support, psychic support, grief counseling, swarm mentality. Weaklings banded together to discuss what they perceive holds power. Unions and agencies and departments designed to protect them. Lawyers who fight their fights for them, vicariously living through sports, war, politics. Celebrity pitfalls, making children, making the world safe for more pussies, with greater, ever-escalating fear as they keep their heads low, graze, and face the same direction upwind from the slaughterhouse. At the magazine release party, it happened again at the reading last night, where I went to listen and not be heard. A magazine release party. They hadn't taken mine, but I had some luck with them in the past. A good crowd for poetry, though they were there to read. The curator was a good poet, told jokes, keep things moving. Introduced the poets one after another, who read their well-crafted, well-honed words, most of whom suffered from a severe lack of stage presence or mic know-how. And people sometimes, sensing closure, applauded or not as these poets delivered their subtle, gentle imagery, a bevy of sunsets and birds and ocean tides, most of which was lost on me. Metaphors massaging some kind of meaning, not one poem about fucking or fighting or drinking or even baseball, no theft or murder, nor honest crime, few seedy revelations of guilt, endless drizzle upon undulating flowers and grassy fields with maybe a fence post or a cowbell sounding in the distance. I thought about my numbing ass upon the hard metal chair as one poem bled seamlessly into the next. I did not buy the magazine, but was the first out the door. The rain had turned gnarly and nasty, stabbing sharply upon my lack of hat and coatless shoulders. I found my truck and drove and was forced onto a detour along the way, taking me from my usual to a dark road, unfamiliar and winding with lots of potholes. I swerved to miss a possum and paid careful attention all the way home. I like that poem. I like that first line. It happened again at the reading last night. It's kind of like that line, the first line of the post office. It was a mistake. It began as a mistake. Was that what it was? Let me see. What was that line? Come on, Paige. I don't have time. Yes, it began as a mistake. It happened again at the reading last night. Yes, and if you have gone to a lot of open mics like I have, that this is absolutely true. Getting all these pastoral themes and poems that all sound alike, war poems or whatever poems, when they're just these kind of more academic poems or whatnot, and you get lots of those. And I'm going to read one more of his called Poets. Look at all the horny, drunken poets in droves, a passel of poets writing and running up bar tabs and talking, always talking. One wonders when they find the time to write, so much to say and observe, and 500 times that to read. And don't forget all the events and readings, hundreds of readings and open mics and book and magazine release parties and eulogies and memorials and workshops and happenings. Because things are always happening, and for a poet to write, they must be part of what is, just as what isn't. And it's good that poets lead such rich social lives because they earn almost no money and are a sensitive lot and perhaps a tad bit suicidal, though mostly in theory, and are prone to long walks in the rain, feeling things deeply and writing things down, lots of things down to get it right or just to get it at all. And they may be ugly or handsome or plain or pukey or rich or poor or tall or short or missing limbs or in some cases having extra parts and perhaps are both well hung and unsung, but either way they are a sensitive, deep-feeling folk of the earth or city, then they love and hate things deeply just as there are numerous things they revere and hold sacred, like the written word, as well as the sanctity of the apt phrase, particularly if they're the ones to have uttered it. There is a funneled pyramid worth of poets to inspire and enthuse from here to Homer, writers who wrote before ink or text, just blood and time and memory, putting it out there to affect and infect, to make us see it like they do, to see anew using our eyes as they did, only through words, from epics to epigrams, from rhyming couplets to discordant, free ranging rants to haiku minimalism with tricks or lack of punctuation because of love or lack of love, but always some wavering measurement in between writing because they must. Whether they are dry or dripping wet, unleashing this torrent of infinite promise and failing in this, suffocating under its own weight, sealing it with their lives, this poetic ultimatum called life, this stuff they tell us, this thing we are. And one of the things, if you happen to buy his book, which I suggest that you do, Undertow Overtures, you can find it at Amazon, and but that's not where I found it. I got it from him, or I traded my book for his book. And one of the things about his poetry, if you look at the page, is that he doesn't, Larry doesn't use punctuation at the end of his lines. He does have, like a few ellipses here and there, and commas in the middle of the lines. But there's also another thing is that the reason I sort of juxtapose his work to the Charles Bukowski Post Office is because his poetry really reminds me a lot of Charles Bukowski's poetry. And even like when I had first met him, that was kind of one of my first observations of his poetry, and was that. And that's one of the reasons I really like his word. And I've journeyed with Larry for a long time, because I met him back, I think, in 2004 or 5 at On the House, that open mic in Seattle, Washington. And I'm gonna read the rest of this chapter 1 from the post office and call it a night. "What little house?" I asked. She wrote the address on a piece of paper. "I'm lonely too," I said. "I'll come by and we'll talk tonight." I was shacked, but the shack job was half the time off somewhere, and I was lonely, all right. I was lonely for that big ass standing beside me. "All right," she said. "See you tonight." She was a good one, all right. She was a good lay, but like all lays, after the 3rd or 4th night, I began to lose interest and didn't go back. But I couldn't help thinking, God, all these mailmen do is drop their letters and get laid. This is the job for me. Oh, yes, yes, yes. This is the job for me. Amen, amen. And this concludes the first season of the Chapel of Poetry. Thank you and good night.